What if the trees built up resistance and just stopped growing? Or the rivers formed a front line and just stopped flowing? There's no amount of intellect that justifies lack of respect. The power on this planet, man, it's time for us to redirect. What we take for granted, two-faced and underhand, it won't get us to tomorrow for much more than you can stand.
Visiting has always been important to Indigenous peoples. Through visiting, we share stories, strengthen kinship, and learn from one another. It allows us to build and maintain respectful relationships in a way that uplifts Indigenous ways of being, doing, and knowing. I'm Matt Dunn, Senior Strategic Officer, Indigenous Engagement at the University of Saskatchewan. Today, we're honored to be meeting on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis, in the hopes of learning more about the research going on here, sharing stories, and honoring and appreciating our interconnectedness. Dr. Chris Phenix, enzymologist, assistant professor in the University of Saskatchewan's chemistry department, and radio imaging specialist from the small town of Arcola, Saskatchewan, traces his Métis ancestry back to his great-great-grandmother in the Red River settlement. His research is focused on developing chemical tools to study biological processes in plants, animals, and humans. He uses new nuclear imaging approaches to detect and help develop new ways to treat diseases. Thanks to funding from the Michael J. Fox Foundation, the Canadian Cancer Society, Canada's Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation, and the Sylvia Fedoruk Canadian Centre for Nuclear Innovation. Thanks for joining us. Well, welcome, Chris. Really good to spend some time with you today. Well, I'd like to start off by talking about your research. So what do you research and what are the big questions you're hoping to tackle?
So my lab focuses on developing chemical tools to study enzymes in plants, animals, and humans. So enzymes are like little molecular machines that catalyze our metabolism. And often in diseases, the activity of these enzymes will increase or decrease. And so we're developing ways that we can get in there and study those enzymes, and in particular, develop ways to image them. So you could actually produce a picture that would represent the activity of enzymes inside a plant, animal, and human. And the big picture stuff would be that we could use this technology, such as positron emission tomography, which is using isotopes produced at the cyclotron here, for diagnosing diseases like Parkinson's or cancer, and then helping guide the development of better drugs, better pharmaceuticals, individualized therapies. So for example, cancer in different people can be very different. So developing ways to image enzymes that could therefore guide which drug to choose for which patient and have better outcomes. And the other cool thing we're doing is that we're applying nuclear medicine techniques to plants. So what has been used traditionally at the hospital, we're doing these same imaging studies using canola and crops and trying to understand how hormones in certain types of hormones in certain plants leads to drought tolerance, for example. So it's a very interesting, fascinating, but challenging area to be in.
Right. So all the way from diseases in humans right to the crops and plants and looking at ways to make those improvements.
Yeah, and that's the one great thing about being a chemist is one day I can show up at work with my Parkinson's disease hat on. The next day I got my agriculture hat on. The next day I got my cancer hat on, and even some types of therapeutic drugs for different types of disease we're looking at as well. So it's a fun area to be in. We're making really good progress in developing probes to detect an enzyme that's really important in Parkinson's disease progression. So patients that have Parkinson's, this enzyme activity tends to drop very quickly. And so there's a lot of companies that are trying to develop ways to boost the activity of that enzyme. The problem is once they start the therapy, they don't know if it's working or not. So being able to peek into the living body and see if it's increasing or decreasing or nothing's happening can be very useful to help that. And then also the other one, two other projects we're doing really, really well in is to image proteases in cancer. So these are little machines that help cancer spread. And I have a PhD student doing a really great job developing ways to image and treat that cancer at the same time. And then the plant project, the plant hormone that we're the first ever images of this hormone distributing around in a living canola plant. We've obtained those this summer, and so that's things are going quite well actually. And that's one cool thing about being at the University of Saskatchewan is you have excellent health researchers and excellent crop researchers. In fact, some of the best in the world here, especially from the crop side. So tackling research that's really at the interface of agriculture and medicine, and vet medicine for that matter, because I collaborate with some of the veterinary faculty. It's a really cool, unique advantage, I think, compared to any other university in Canada. And I think one of the things that I'd like to point out is the cyclotron here on campus too. That's different from the synchrotron. Most people have heard of the synchrotron, but the cyclotron is a device that produces isotopes for medical imaging. And so that opening up that facility here on campus, they've recruited 5 or 6 new scientists, some of which are world-class experts in the field, and they're doing cutting-edge nuclear medicine research right here in the province. And the researchers and students we have at the UVest are second to none, right? With really high quality researchers here on campus, and I think the province of Saskatchewan needs to be aware of that. Back home in my small town, which is southeast Saskatchewan, they don't hear a lot about the research, and I think this is something that we need to be communicating to the people of Saskatchewan about. Where the university is not just a place where you send your students to take an undergrad degree; it's really a center of discovery.
Chris, do you want to tell us a bit about the lab that we're in today?
Yeah, sure, Matt. So this is a radiochemistry lab, and so the cyclotron produces short-lived isotopes for imaging. And so what happens is that obviously we can't go into the cyclotron to get the isotope, so they're actually delivered to these hot cells, and you'll see them in a minute, where we take those isotopes and incorporate them into radiopharmaceuticals for diagnosing various diseases, helping guide therapy, doing lots of really cool research here with this facility. The isotope is delivered right here, and then we can transfer it into these different stations. And in these different stations, which these are called hot cells, they have a lot of lead to keep the radioactivity inside. And inside, that's where we actually convert the isotope into a radiopharmaceutical by doing chemistry on it. And then what we have to do is take that radiopharmaceutical, go to another lab and purify it, and then we can do various imaging studies in plants or humans to learn about the diseases we're studying.
Should we check out one of these, is it cells?
Sure, hot cells, yeah. Safety is, when you're doing radioactive work, safety is the top priority, obviously. So all of this equipment in here is designed to limit the radiation exposure to the person doing the work. So you could imagine that somebody who does this for a living is here in the lab very often, so they have to make sure that their radiation exposure is very, very low, because you're being exposed to it every morning, every day, or 5 days a week. So a lot of this equipment, which is super expensive, is designed to protect the chemists who are doing this radiopharmaceutical production work. And then if you think about it from the other end, when we're scanning patients, for example, usually the patient is just scanned once or twice, and the actual dose that they get is still at a very safe level. And most of the time in Saskatchewan, it's used to diagnose cancer. So obviously, the small risks that come with the actual radiopharmaceutical are far outweighed from the benefit. If you get a diagnosis of cancer, you can identify different lesions in the body, because if you have a metastasis, that's when physicians really have to start treating your cancer aggressively, for example. So the whole thing's set up to be very, very safe and efficient.
The time commitments for writing grants, can you talk a bit about some of the successful grants that you've been awarded?
Yeah, I've been pretty fortunate, I would say, to get some prestigious grants over the years. I've received funding from the Canadian Cancer Society, and for an innovation grant. So the idea is to do crazy but not stupid research. And that was the project that started the research where we're trying to detect aggressive cancers, image those proteases that are eating away in a tumor environment to helping cancer spread. And a lot of those grants are like 10%, 5% success rates. So you work on an application that takes you 6 weeks, and you have a 95% chance of failing. But the positive is that they're out there, and I was able to land some good grants. I'd say the other one, which is really I'm very proud of, would be from the Michael J. Fox Foundation. So that's a competition that was held in North America, and people from academia, so universities and industry could apply, and I think there was 4 given out, and one of them was to my research group.
Where did you grow up, and how did you come to study chemistry?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town called Arcola, Saskatchewan, in southeast Arcola. I have Métis ancestry, so my great-great-grandmother was in the Red River settlement, and I grew up in had a fairly difficult childhood, to be honest. My parents divorced at a very young age. Wasn't a clean divorce either. And the year after that, my father lost his farm because the late 80s, there was a drought and a lot of issues. Farming was tough at that time. And so my father raised me and my sister. We ended up staying with our father, but he raised me and my sister, and he drove a school bus on the White Bear First Nations. And so, although Dad loved the job, he loved being in the community, it didn't pay a lot of money. So I think we were about $10,000 a year below the poverty line for a family of 3. And so, I think that's part of the reason why it was confidence was an issue as a kid, because that was a challenging upbringing. I can clearly remember going to my friend's house and seeing them have a mother cooking dinner, and I'd be like, really happy to have like my dad wasn't the best cook, so it was really a nice thing. So I didn't have the confidence to go to university. I tried to get into technical school, but there was a problem with my application. But thankfully, there was a few really good teachers in Arcola, Mr. Zacharias, Mrs. James, and Mr. Robinson. And they kind of got into cahoots with my dad and said, you're going to university. So I really didn't have any choice in the matter. So when I showed up at university, I didn't have any clue. I thought I was going to fail out right away. I didn't have any clue what to take. And I was always interested in sports, so I took pre-physiotherapy. And so I had to end up taking these chemistry classes. And I started to actually enjoy them quite a bit. And once I got the confidence, it actually became quite fun. And so that was kind of my weird path into chemistry and how I got to university.
You mentioned being concerned about staying in university when you started. What was one of the key differences to keep you studying?
From compared to when I started, you mean? Yeah, I think just those friends. I think having peers, supportive peers. It became fun to go to the university and study till midnight with 4 or 5 people. The same people pretty much were there all the time. So what used to be sort of considered studying, I don't want to study, something you actually look forward to. And Monica was the person who would keep us on task. We would have too much fun at times and would remind us next Tuesday's the midterm, so get at it. But I think that was a big key thing, and just like I said earlier, confidence, right? I can do this. And I was a chemistry tutor during my graduate studies, and I swear I would spend 80% of my effort just trying to instill confidence in those kids. And those students, as soon as they would get that confidence, boom, they would take off. So,
tell me about your journey of discovering your Métis roots.
Oh yes, so this is interesting because when I was a kid, we didn't hear much about it. And I was talking to my uncle the other day, and they hid it from people, right? When he was a kid, they were bullied because they had Métis ancestry. So they learned to hide it very quickly. And it wasn't until probably around the mid-90s that our family started to discuss that. And then we started to dig into, I think the older generation knew it, but just didn't talk about it. And so it was the younger generation that started to actually look in and map out family trees and things like that. And it was something I would encourage anybody to do because it was very interesting.
Do you remember when you first heard about your own Métis heritage? Was it when you were a child, when you were older?
Okay, it's pretty obvious when I think back and look at it, but yeah, it was not talked about at all. The good news is now it is, right? So a lot of the uncles and aunties and cousins, and with the internet, you can actually find out lots of really great information. Like we actually found the script that great-great-grandma Marie Rose was given online, and so there was a lot of interesting stuff to be found out there. So,
are you able to incorporate your identity into the work that you do, or does any of your research have any implications for Indigenous peoples?
Where I would say that I've tried to make an effort that has been, I think, very, very rewarding was engaging with high school students who have Indigenous ancestry in First Nations communities, engaging teachers, because science in rural in Indigenous communities there's still a lot of need to have, teachers that teach science courses like chemistry at the high school level, while also incorporating in, Indigenous ways of knowing as well. I think there's a really interesting opportunity to look at that. So I think the Kirkness program, the Verna J. Kirkness, and that's a program out of BC where Indigenous kids come to the university for a week and spend time in a research lab. And I hosted 2 students, one from Northern Alberta, one from Northern Saskatchewan, in my lab a couple of years ago, and they had an amazing time. At first, just like I was when I left small town Saskatchewan and came to the university, University of Regina is where I did my undergrad. There was a huge culture shock. So at first you could see that there was a lot of they were shy and out of their element. But by the end of the week, it was an amazing transformation where now they're looking forward to come to university and see it. It's a safe, supportive place with a lot of different people. And we're looking at trying to develop high school chemistry labs that can be taught at rural and First Nations communities, because chemistry is, to do an experiment that is culturally relevant, that is culturally engaging, but that is also safe. If you're not a chemist, handling chemicals is something that's really quite daunting, right? And so we're kind of focusing on helping the teachers develop these labs, teach the teachers so that they can go back to the communities and show these high school students a really interesting chemistry experiment. Mm-hmm. And often with we're trying to find traditional uses as well, like pick an experiment that would look at a molecule found in buffalo berries, for example, or some sort of natural product that they can relate to.
There's so much great work happening in terms of addressing the underrepresentation of Indigenous students in STEM and in science and engineering. So it's great to hear about your involvement there.
Like for me growing up in a small town, and it's the same in a lot of the First Nations communities, we didn't have access to the same sort of level of science education that you would in Saskatoon high schools. And so that can be a very daunting task to go from, taking introductory chemistry without having the background knowledge. And so having access to those classes, I think that sort of acts as a bridge between high school and university, I think has been very successful.
It's been great getting to spend time with you today. Thanks for hanging out, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. It was a pleasure to be here.